training. Couple of things we want to mention before we kind of get started here. We have a new initiative where I'm actually trying to sort of pass on the torch of Friday night training to a group of other people. And some of those people are going to be familiar, and some of them are going to be strangers to a lot of you guys. We've actually recruited a cabal of basically, hurricane level top of server type people who are very sort of friends of the clan, and they're interested in teaching some stuff for you guys. We're going to try to still keep the focus on elemental topics. We're not necessarily going to go in and have a class on uh, a single ship and how to maximize its performance in clan battles, because that's too narrow. We're going to keep topics a little broader, but we will have different guest speakers. At least that's the intention, to kind of broaden things a little bit so we get more perspectives, and it's not just me doing it because I got other shit to do. But, you know, that's the intention. And over the next coming weeks, we're expecting to kind of settle on that and start getting more comfortable in rotating Friday night teachers. So if you have a burning passion to teach something, then we definitely have a spot for somebody like that. And we can give you resources, and we can give you lesson plans, and we can help you out with that. But there's a captive audience here that can't get away. So I figure if you want to teach something, then let's set you up and get you going. So that's going to be the plan going forward with Friday nights. It's going to be a little bit more diverse. We're going to try to bring in more people, more perspectives, more topics. But that said, tonight is going to be a training room on Destroyer play. Um, I should probably put something up in Worship's chat. Okay, so I've got a stream up now. It'll help kind of give some context to what we're talking about, but it's not actually all super important because what we're really doing is we're talking about some soft skills. If we're talking about gunnery, if we're talking about uh, positioning, there are a couple of fundamental rules to follow, and you can kind of say, yeah, you should do this, you should do that. But when we're talking about destroyer and counter destroyer play, it's a lot more of a soft skill. The rules are a little bit more ambiguous. And so there's a couple of things that, we can count on. And that comes down to the different types of destroyers. When you look at a destroyer in your port, or when you're playing a destroyer, it's going to conform to one of three different sort of archetypes. And these archetypes are like a torpedo destroyer, a gun destroyer, or a hybrid destroyer. And there's a lot of different flavors on top of that, but the gun destroyer in general gets its damage in a game through the use of its guns. And the torpedo destroyer in general gets its damage in a game through the use of its torpedoes. And the hybrid is able to kind of switch back and forth. And there are definitely roles and niches for all three. But when you see destroyer play, often your positioning on the map and what you're intending to do is heavily dependent on which type of destroyer you are. So if you're a destroyer and you're looking to mess with this cap over here on the right, and I'm referencing my stream here for anybody that's interested in watching, you've got a couple of different good positions for gun destroyers. Number one would be on an island, because you can kind of hide behind that island and get your guns to shoot a target and not be spotted. There's some destroyers which work really well doing this, like the Harugumo, the Japanese gunboat line. It just does this well. It has smoke, but it doesn't last super long. So putting yourself here is safe because you can get your guns out and you can save your smoke for when you really need it. There are other good positions that you can take when you're a gun destroyer. Something like this would be pretty decent if you have long duration smoke, like the American destroyers. If you smoke up here and start shooting and farming somebody up here, that's great. Of course, there are considerations and things to worry about depending on where you put your boat. But gun destroyers, their provenance is circling around the edge of a cap, trying to get angles on things and looking for positions where they can do their damage and not be detected. Now, of course, there are exceptions to that rule, like for example the Russian heavy destroyers and the French destroyers. they survive much more on evasion than smoke. So if you're in a Marceau or you're in a Cabrosk or you're in a Kleber, you're not necessarily going to be in a static position. You're going to be running around like a chicken with your head cut off, dodging everything that throws at you. And that's fine. That gives you a lot more options as far as positioning goes. And the only thing that really puts a limit on your positioning in those things is hard limits. Like if you go up here, your ability to run open water and dodge in this narrow corridor becomes much more limited. And you can find yourself in a position where you're at close range with another ship and you can't really dodge its fire. And so you're removing the advantages of that boat. So most of the time, those fast, speedy, dodgy open water gunboats, you're going to see them a little further back, plying the open water lanes and shooting at a little bit longer range. So that would be somewhere like here, here, somewhere a little bit further out. It's also important that you stay out of radar range in most of these ships here, because if you're in radar range, then somebody can kind of pick you up and get damage on you when you're really not ready for it. Quick check on something. Okay. Now, the third type is going to be a torpedo destroyer. And torpedo destroyers are also pretty flexible. In general, torpedo destroyers are pretty stealthy, so you're going to be able to get around the map without being detected other than by radar or hydro or another destroyer. And you're going to be able to outspot anything around you. So you can kind of control the terms of that engagement. And that's really important because usually your guns aren't up to the task of just punching out whatever your target is. Unless he's really low on health or you got friends, a torpedo destroyer is not really going to be able to take that type of stand up surface fight. And so they're going to be looking for other angles that they can use, like here. If you can get a torpedo destroyer up here, then he's got a lane where you can throw torps all around the back of this island. And this is really valuable because if there's cruisers or something, battleships or something that's hiding behind this island, getting that shot is a pretty good way to land a bunch of torps. You can also see torpedo destroyers over here, on the flanks, trying to get this angle. And if you can manage to shoot up the center and get a torpedo on the destroyer on the back line, getting a torpedo boy up here is just awesome because all these ships down here are going to be broadside to you and they're not really going to be able to evade those torps. There's a lot of nuance in torpedo destroyer play, but in general, the closer you can safely get before you launch those torpedoes, the better odds you are of landing of multiple torpedoes on a specific ship. You can also use torpedo destroyers to hunt other DDs and launch those torpedoes against destroyers based on like a radio location indicator or somebody else spotting the other destroyer, or even just you getting in close enough to surface spot him and then moving away while the other destroyer hunts you. And you just shoot torps at him. If you land a torp on another destroyer, it's significant because you're probably going to be able to, even with your puny guns, take that guy out in a surface brawl. And that risk is often enough to make those heavy gunboats or those hybrid boats be really cautious around a torpedo focused destroyer. So, to sum up, we've got our gunboat purists either behind islands out here in smoke or a little further back, open water. We've got our torpedo boats on the flanks and looking for the sneaky play. And we've got the hybrid boats kind of as a mix. They can do this. Like you can put a gearing up here and it's really effective. You can put a Holland up here, it's really effective. There's a lot of different things you can make that play. But if you put a Marceau up here, it's not necessarily going to be super effective because A, it's isolated. B, you can detect it. And C, if it doesn't have friends, it's just got to kind of run away. It may not actually be more effective up here than down here where it actually has friends. So that's the basics of positioning with destroyers. We're not necessarily going to go into too much more detail than that, but we do want to talk about counter DD play as well because that's really important. So if we're talking about counter DD play, there's a couple of things that we need to highlight, and we're going to mostly focus on cruisers here because cruisers are the ship that's meant to counter destroyers. Battleships can occasionally get a salvo in, and there's a few battleships that like have tools to counter destroyers, like hydro or radar. But for the most part, battleships aren't really a good DD killer. Of course, exceptions to the rule exist, but usually when we're talking about go kill that DD, you're going to send a cruiser off to do that job, or perhaps a gunboat destroyer. So in order to do that, you have to think first of all about where is safe if you're a cruiser and you want to kill a destroyer. Now, the most common position for a cruiser to be is going to be on island positions, where they've got a little bit of cover against torpedoes. If you're, say, open water over here in a cruiser, you have the potential to get torped from multiple different angles. And that's called cross torping, and it is lethal because it means that no matter where you angle, you're going to be taking some torpedoes, probably a lot of torpedoes. So a cruiser that's out here, he's relying on his ability to act unpredictably. Move over here. Now move over there. Now move back there. And evade those torpedoes before they can really home in on his location. If you're out here and you're making turns that are predictable, like say maybe you're going in a circle right around the edge of this cap, well, they kind of know what you're doing, and so they're going to be able to predict you accordingly. He's just turning right very softly, and he just kind of keeps doing it. So you got to mess with your speed, you got to mess with your heading, and ideally, you're going to have some form of cover where you can at least block off one angle of torpedoes, because here there's only two angles of torpedoes that you can really realistically take. Other than positioning for cruisers, though, whether it's on a island or open water, there's a couple of things you need to know when you're hunting destroyers, and that's your consumables. You get your hydro and you got your radar. Hydro can be useful when hunting destroyers. Its primary purpose, I would say, is probably going to be defense, to try to make sure that you know when torpedoes are coming and can take evasive action a little earlier. But that's not the only use of hydro. If there's a DD sitting down here in smoke and you're up here on this island and you've got hydro, especially if you have long range hydro like the Hindenburg has, the Germans, then you can make this play here and suddenly you're within hydro range. This is kind of a risky play because you're pulling yourself out from a covered position. And the question is asked, of course, is what do you do after you make this play? You might be able to detect this guy, but suddenly you're attracting torps from many different angles, and everybody's focusing on you with their guns too. So is that really a play you can survive? And the answer is nuanced. It is sometimes. It's dependent on who's out there, what angles they have, and maybe whether they've launched their torps recently or not. It's also depending on whether you can escape from that. And escape is probably going to be trying to get back in a covered position. So you're going to probably want to turn around and get back north, because this is generally safety in this position. Getting your bow off is a really good way to make it harder to get torped, because you're moving away from those torpedoes and you have more time to react to them.
Question.
Hydro can be used though to keep yourself safe, close the distance, and isolate somebody that's in smoke, especially if your own ship is not detected. If you get that stealth hydro up and then all of a sudden, ping, DD gets lit up, you're going to be able to get some damage on him and probably take him out before he actually goes dark. The other consumable that you've got that's super important is radar. And radar really comes in two flavors. You've got your US radar, which is generally longer duration, but shorter in range. It's got a 10-kilometer range base. Um, some of them are a little shorter than 10K. And that might be useful if you're, on this island and there's a destroyer that's playing open water fast and loose with you out here. But if he's just at 11 kilometers right behind this island here, then it's not useful at all because you're not going to hit anything. Now, there are ways to still make it useful. If you maybe coordinate with your team and tell this guy to pull back a little bit, then a lot of times, destroyers will advance to fill that gap and they'll get a little cocky. And then they're not really watching for you over here because you're just not really in their sight line. And maybe they forget you're there, or they don't necessarily see you. Maybe go dark. There's a couple of different things you can do, and then all of a sudden you pop that radar up. These guys are lit, and this guy goes to town. So radar is a nice team tool that you can use to help your team out in a number of different situations. Um, but you have to be smart about its use because it has a relatively long cooldown. Russian radar is a little bit more forgiving in the fact that it has a longer uh, radius. It detects things at 12 kilometers instead of 10, but it in general has a shorter duration. There are exceptions to that. The Nevsky is one. The Moskva is another exception, though the Moskva's is not quite as long. The Nevsky has a really long duration and long range radar, so it's probably the best radar in the game. The downside to that though is that those ships with a really good radar are kind of chock full of other weaknesses too. So it's not like bring Nevsky, that just counters everything. Maybe not. So with this in mind, if you're playing a cruiser and you're looking to counter destroyers, trying to stay mobile is key. If you just sit on this position and you're just waiting for a destroyer to come in your range, and you're not really, thinking any more than that, then these DDs are going to take advantage of your static position and figure out a plan to come and kill you. That might mean coming up here, smoking up, bringing a friend, and then both of them open up guns on you with a third destroyer out here outside the smoke spotting, or maybe shooting torps. This starts getting really lethal really fast, because this position, you may not even be able to see them, because these guys are out of range and this guy's facing away and probably got a little bit cover behind the island if he needs it. So this can be really problematic if you're stationary. However, if you especially use team tactics and then take your ships and aggressively push the enemy team when they're trying to make a play, knock them back, and then they scatter, then suddenly you've bought yourself a new lease on life. And with your hydro and your radar, you might actually be able to take one out or do enough damage on one that they're not going to try that same thing twice. The real question is when you do this, will their buddies come in and kill you? And you don't want that to happen, so you have to pull back to safety. So this leads to short rushes and fast retreats when you're in a cruiser that's playing against destroyers. Generally speaking, you don't really want to just stay stationary on an island. Destroyers have one other natural enemy that they have to consider too, though, and that is a DD trying to counter them. So let's say that you have this, say it's a Shimikaze, is a good torp destroyer. He's getting angles up here. He's looking hungry. You're in a really great position. But if the enemy has a Marceau on their team, or Khabarovsk, or a Kleber, or something that's a really good gunboat, and you haven't spotted him yet, it's possible that he's just kind of lurking back here, waiting for somebody to try it. And if you're up here just kind of looking for that option, he's probably watching you on radio location, staying safe, staying dark, and coordinating with his team for that perfect moment to pop out and say, "Surprise! The cruisers have guns on you, and I'm right here too. You are dead." That is classic, And to deal with this, you have to use your destroyer team tactics, because a lot of times, if you're doing something sneaky, you're not going to be able to thread a cruiser through that position. He's just going to get spotted up and citadel. A destroyer, though, might be able to make it. And if you're doing that, well, bring some buddies. That's your best, your best response to that Kleber play. You got another friend here. You got another friend there. Kleber says, "I got a radio location ping. They're doing this." He pops out, tries to make his ambush. Suddenly, you're counter ambushing. This guy might just pull back a little bit, and suddenly these cruisers have nothing to shoot at. And this Kleber is going, "I need support." Well, there's no support to be had. And so if you're using your brain and working with your team, you can get advantageous situations, even if like these are 3 torpedo boats. With a 3-to-1 advantage, torpedo boats, they've got enough gunpowder. They can take out a Kleber. This guy's not going to be able to kill 3 of them. He probably will get 1, but that guy's going down. And then this position is unable. Just because you won this fight, the enemy team is reduced and they've lost the angle of defense. So being able to take out an enemy position when you're in a destroyer is really all about your angles, your ship's capabilities, and your team play. Any questions? Because we're going to go out and we're going to drill this.
Yeah, I have one question, Rigel.
Hi, Van fucking Dreadstar. What are you doing?
I had a question. What's team play?
Oh, well, I wouldn't expect you to know.
That thing you don't do in randoms.
Well, if you're in a div, you can actually get a good bit of team play going. And it can be really useful because if you have the advantage of team play, then you can coordinate with somebody on, like, say, how to kill that Kleber there. And that's really useful, But if you're out there and you're just playing relaxed and you're having a beer and you're chatting with your friends, a lot of times you don't big brain play that. One thing that I have noticed though is that if you're, in a div and you've got a bunch of really experienced players, then a lot of times it's just, "Oh, I think there's a Kleber up there. You guys want to give me a hand?" And then instantly everybody's like, "Oh yeah, okay. We've done this before. We know what we're gonna do. We're gonna group up. We're gonna come around. We're gonna murder." And having that instinct built in is something that just comes from playing a ton of games. And playing a ton of games with friends, because you wouldn't think to mention that and think to drill that strategy and come up with this idea of how to do that unless you had people that you can talk to. So getting in a div and playing some games, even if it's just a DD wolf pack, it's going to help your DD play out as a whole. Not only is it going to help your DD stats and your XP and your credits and all that stuff, but if you bring your DD into competitive play, then suddenly you're going to have these mental tools available to yourself, and you're going to make those calls. It's like, hey, I think there's a Colbert up there. Let's do this. And everybody knows what you're talking about because you played with your buddies. You've done this before. That is key.
Can
Any
I
other
answer the question? Can I
Can
answer
you
it in
answer
one
the
sentence?
question? Yeah, yeah, you can answer the
In
question.
one sentence, not in like a book that you
Oh,
just gave.
fine.
Okay. Team play is forget yourself in a destroyer and play for the team. Period. Team play is spot for your team, stay alive, cap when you need to cap, do what the team needs. You're the team's eyes. Team play is not about ego, it's about giving the team what it needs when it needs it. That's what it is.
Good response, man. That's really good.
You
I think
get a
we did have
cookie.
something else. You get a cookie. Yeah, gold star, man. Gold star. I think we did have something else from Potato as well. He wanted to talk a little bit about leading destroyers because that's a challenge. Actually hitting a destroyer that doesn't want to be hit. What you got, Potato?
So, uh, first things first, there's a lot of destroyers that are specifically built around speed. Obviously your French boys, they're sort of live and die by the throttle. Uh, it's a good idea to like pop into preview ships and sort of get a good grasp of what lines play a bit faster. Uh, Now, obviously, when you lead a destroyer, you have to worry about not just how far in front of them you're aiming. Destroyers are very maneuverable. They're liable to make a quick turn, especially if you're more than 10 clicks away. So it might be a good idea if you think he's going to turn away, like if he knows you're there and he knows he's spotted, shoot a little in front of him and a little above him. Because then you're more liable, especially if you're in a battleship and you have that spread, to catch him as he's turning away. And another good piece of advice: if a DD pops up, if you're not in a ship that can easily switch rounds, don't immediately click the HE button and wait for a volley to load up. Shoot the HE, then switch, or shoot the AP, then load the HE. You might not have more than a few seconds of that DD spotted, and you might waste a critical opportunity to get some damage on them. Yeah, you unless it's like a Haragumo, you're not going to get that full pen damage, but even over pens, they hurt. DDs obviously are very squishy. So any kind of opportunistic salvos, you take them. Worry about switching to the right shell type after that. Uh, but as for leading, if any of you are running any of the mod packs, running lights is a very good thing to have. It puts a little green, yellow, or red indicator above a ship you have selected and lets you know, hey, is it reversing? Is it more stationary? It'll flicker if it's starting to speed up or slow down. It gives you a good idea of how you might need to lead your shells. If it starts flickering, obviously close in that lead. He's slowing down, vice versa if he's speeding up. But if you don't have that, zoom in with your binoculars, look at the smoke. And this applies really to any ship you're shooting at. But if you look at the smoke coming out of their funnels, that's a very good indication of how fast he's going or if he's slowing down. That like second to 2 seconds you take to look at the smoke before firing, absolutely worth it because you're going to land more of your shells. Information's key here.
You can also take that second or two to try to figure out where the destroyer's rudder is. Because their rudder's quick, but it's not infinitely quick. If their rudder is full over to the left, it's going to take them a second or two to switch that around. And leading your shots accordingly is going to land you more hits. So a lot of times, my first salvo or two on a destroyer, I'm gonna wait 2 or 3 seconds. I'm just gonna wait and kind of see what he's doing, and then I'll take the shot. Especially if it's a really important shot, like in a Venezia or something, where you got to take half his health. If you don't, you're not doing your job. So battleships is like whatever. I'll pop some shots. Okay, I
Right,
shot at him. Maybe I'll hit. But
Rigel, I
Venezia,
did.
it's
Sorry.
precision.
Rigel, I did notice one thing in my gameplay, and that is with destroyers. First of all, I want to say that smoke is good, but it's also so is their bow wave. It'll teach you the same things. If they're
Mhm.
going slow, there's no bow wave. If they're going fast, it's huge compared to the ship. But that said, I found the best way because a destroyer is always aggressive, so he's going to be coming after you either to shoot his guns or to lay a spread on you. When he does that, he has to come towards you to get his initial burst of speed. And that's when I found it to be successful. Is they're hard to hit when they're coming at you, but they don't change directions much until they make that turn. And you've got them either way.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, going away or coming towards you, that seems to me to be the easiest one. When they're doing a lateral move on you, a Marceau, you can't hit that thing when they're doing 40 knots across the map. Forget
Yeah.
about it.
50.
50
50.
knots.
Okay.
Yeah. 55. So one of the tricks that you can use to hit with somebody that's doing a lateral move or that's just being too damn evasive is, in addition to holding your shot and checking his rudder and checking his speed, um, you can, if you're not completely confident that he's going to keep doing that, maybe you think that he's got guns on you, he's watching for your shot and he will actively dodge it, then you can actually shoot your guns in ripple fire. Shoot your front turret, wait a second, then shoot your middle turret, wait a second, then shoot your back turret. And you might use slightly different aim for all those three turrets, like especially if you've got a broadside Marceau at 15 kilometers and you're just not sure what he's going to do. Well, your first shot, you're going to lead him forward. The second shot, you're going to assume he stays still. And the third shot, you're going to shoot behind him, and you'll at least get some damage on him at that point because it's very difficult to dodge all three shots. Whereas if you shoot everything, assuming he's going to move forward and then he just sort of doesn't, then you've got nothing out of that.
That's very true for the famous, and I'm sure people have seen it playing randoms, the famous I'm a Grazi and I'm just going to sit stationary broadside to the enemy team on this point, and whenever somebody tries to shoot me, I'm going to go a little bit forward or a little bit backward.
Yeah, it's like 5 knots. Just like 5 knots. You don't need to go very fast. Yeah, it's so annoying,
Yeah,
but it's pretty effective.
you
There
can
are ships
also
that play, and that's their primary method of evasion. They just sit there. They're just blapping you with your guns, and you can't hit them. Uh, if that happens, sometimes your ship might have smoke, or you might be able to use an island to break the line off. And if you've tried, you've gotten 3 or 4 salvos out, and you're just not doing damage. Change your tactics, reposition, go dark, run away. You just might need to reset that engagement, and it's better than just trying to stay there doing the same thing and acting predictably.
another thing that is useful if you have torpedoes on your ship, select the DD, pop in your torpedo view. That the white indicator will actually show you sort of how the ship's moving. So if it's turning away, you're going to see that reflected in the indicator, suggested launch angle. I find, especially with cruisers, is very useful for just getting an idea of how fast they may be moving or if they're turning away. And also, if you know that there could be DDs in an area, start slinging your guns over before you approach like an island or a gap. I normally look the direction I want to look in for the DD and then hold my right mouse button. That allows me to still look around freely, but my guns are slinging to whatever direction I was pointing in when I started holding that button.
For team play, especially, that makes a lot of difference. Specifically, if you've got somebody that's charging out and going to hydro somebody up, getting a second guy to help, or third or fourth, however many people you can help, say, I'm gonna detect this destroyer. Let's get all of our guns pre-positioned on that square because we know he's there. And then you have instant guns firing as soon as he gets lit up. Same thing for radar. If you've got a Nevsky and he's going to pop his radar, if you have a Venezia friend, you tell him what you're doing, And suddenly it goes from, you're going to take some damage. You might get knocked down to half to you're just going to get obliterated.
Everyone that has a Venezia that's on my team is in my Insta friend.
Yeah.
Period.
So that's basically what you're going to be doing in Destroyer and Counter Destroyer play. You got to work with friends to accomplish objectives. You don't necessarily want to take, a super huge risk, maybe like going, taking a torp boat pair up here. This is a huge risk unless you know that you can do it. Like, say, maybe these guys are engaged up here in this fight. They got all their guns up there. Well, if that's happening and they're relatively stationary, popping out, launching some torps with 2 destroyers, and then you just circle around and, you get out of line of sight. Suddenly there's this huge wall of torps coming in on these guys. And you probably just took this cap. So if you can do something like that, great. But if these guys are just ready and waiting for you to try that, you're hiding behind this island and they got their hydro ready, and this guy has radar and he's just waiting for you to try it. And there's nothing else to distract them. Popping out here is suicide because they will see you coming and they will kill you, and they will kill you fast. Destroyers don't have the advantage in firepower most of the time. If you want to use your guns to take somebody out, it's going to be a prolonged affair, and you don't want to sacrifice yourself too early. Torp boats have more burst potential, but still, a torp boat trying to make this play up here, most of the time is going to get detected right about there, and he doesn't have angles to actually torp anything. Guns on this guy because he's detected and he's the primary threat. They don't want him to be able to close in and get his torps off. So, this guy's going to go down pretty quick. So you don't necessarily want to do that until you've got a good idea of what these guys are doing and what they're thinking. Get in their heads, try to make a prediction, and then work with teammates to exploit that prediction. Just like this wolf pack up here.
One thing I would recommend, throttle jockeying can be effective with throwing DDs off with their torps, especially when you're in lower tier randoms. But once you're in high tier play, with how fast torpedoes are and with the amount of torpedo launches that each DD can have, be careful throttle jockeying too much, because it works for throwing off that first spread, but if they have another one, you're now going pretty slow. I normally just quickly pop down to half and then back up to full. It'll only slow me down 5 or 6 knots. That's enough to still throw off most of a spread, but I still have enough speed to keep dodging. Don't over throttle jockey.
So to give you a good example of what that looks like, if this is a Hindenburg and you got a destroyer out here in smoke, you get that long range hydro on the Hindenburg, you're going out, you're going to hydro him up, you want to take him out, and then you want to get back safety, right? So as soon as you come out here, you're probably getting spotted, and you can make this run, maybe, and you might be able to catch this guy out in hydro if he's not really on, lookout for it, but you can expect torps coming in at you. If as soon as you pick him up on hydro, you just go broadside, then they will predict that, and torps will be coming on the angle that you're headed. If you go full stop, those torps might go sailing in front of you, but a good destroyer player is going to launch one rack of torps and then wait to see what you do. And then he'll launch a second rack. He's like, okay, he's going broadside. I'm going to launch it right here. He's slowing down. Okay, yeah, I got it. I got him. 3 torp hits. This guy's down to a quarter.
I hold the second set until he's in 2 kilometer range, right? I don't want a chance not killing him.
Right. So really experienced destroyer players are going to try to predict what the cruiser is going to do. And if you're acting predictably, then that's a problem. So, sometimes you can actually be really creative with that. You can go broadside and then reverse a little bit and then be like, haha, as all those torps go right in front of you where they were. And then you accelerate and turn out, and you might be able to do some stuff like that. But bear in mind that you're trying to get in their heads and they're trying to get in your head. So if you can be more creative and more evasive than they are, then you'll probably win. If not, then you're going to get dev struck, my son. You're going down. So yeah, this is what we're going to drill.
Good enough.
Any other comments from the team?
I just want to say it's just as bad for a destroyer to sit broadside in the smoke as it is for a battleship to stay broadside to the destroyer.
That's right. Cruisers have torps too, and cruisers have guns. If you get detected and you're broadside in smoke, you're going to take some damage because you can only go two ways, forward, backward. And they'll see which way you're going and they'll lead accordingly. You're going to take some damage. So, you want to make sure that you're watching your angles. If you're going like 3/4, northeast in this case, or northwest, or southeast, southwest, not just straight east west, then at that point, they're not sure exactly where you're going to go and if you're going to turn. And their initial shot, you might actually be able to evade it. That's really good because your destroyer hit points are very finite. There's very few destroyers that can just take a lick and keep on ticking.
If you're also gunboating from inside smoke, smoke is not shell proof. If you're sitting in one spot just continually ripple firing or volleying off, people could still shoot in that smoke and hit you. It's a good idea to keep sort of going back and forth between reversing and maybe going forward at quarter or half speed. Just keep in mind the size of your smoke screen, but don't give the enemy an easy opportunity to just blind fire in. Yep.
I think probably the most important thing that you can do as a destroyer is watch the environment. If you see that this is happening, then you might have opportunities to do something else over here because they're distracted. But if you're not really watching your environment and see what's happening strategically on the map, then you might not see this and you might not be able to understand that there's an opportunity here. There may be an opportunity there because there's a play being made and you can exploit that. All too often I see, a big pack of potential damage is kind of sitting out here while a bunch of other people go up here and die. It's like, well, we appreciate your sacrifice. I really wish these guys had done something with that opportunity. So if you're making a play, watch what's happening.
No,
Is it okay if I make a comment?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, as a scout in the Army, and DDs are kind of like scouts, I would say that DD's biggest tool is its concealment, really. More than anything else, being able to stay hidden and be the eyes so that way everybody else can see enemies and do damage is even more effective than torps and the guns that they carry.
Yep,
So
number one.
Don't
I think that
discount.
knowing the difference in cover and concealment, like they were just saying, is really huge with that too.
That's not always true. I think your
Right.
ideal state of being in a destroyer is to be in a position where you're hard to hit and you can either spot or distract. So French destroyers are a great example, Russian destroyers are a great example, but there's a lot of ships where you want to be the one getting shot at because they're not going to hit you. Marceau, a Kleber, a Cabarrus, things like that. So there's a lot of value in that as well.
Exactly.
Get off my cruiser, right?
Yeah.
Get off
the Hindenburg making
It's like a hey, look at me.
Right.
Well, it's also there. Something like a Marceau is a very psychological thing. It's like you're shooting at them, they're turning their guns towards you, then you suddenly go dark, and they wait a couple of seconds to start rotating it back, and then as they rotate it back, you open up on them again. It gets them very frustrated and very flustered very quickly.
Yeah,
They've
I mean,
lost 30 seconds of DPM.
Putting yourself in a position where you're at like 15 to 20 degree angle backwards is really where you want to be, because forward, back, turning, juking, all that becomes a lot easier when you're this tiny little sliver of a fast little destroyer that's hard to hit and everybody wants to hit you.
You want to practice that, get the Ohotnik.
Yeah, that's a good one. So to illustrate what he's talking about there, if this is a Hindenburg making a hydro push on a Gearing and Smoke here, and he's got like a Shima buddy, and he's focusing on this fight, right? And if you leave this guy alone, he might actually be able to take one or both of these guys out, because that hydro lasts for a long time, and he's making his push, So if you're a Marceau or a Kleber or some other gunboat out here, even a Harigamo, this is a good gun target. Even if you're not in an optimal range or position and you're like, I might actually get hurt if I open up. Sometimes it's a good idea to do that anyway, just to distract him, because you're in a team with all four of these guys, and putting all of the damage potential on this Hindenburg at the same time is going to give him more targets than he can deal with. If everybody's shooting torps and guns at this guy at the same time, maybe you lose one, but this guy's dead. And that's what you're after. It's not suicide tactics, but you keep in mind what this cruiser can and can't do. You also have to be watching this guy. If this guy's right here just kind of waiting for you to try that, then yeah, opening up with guns on this is a little risky because this guy might turn guns and then you have 2 ships shooting at you with good angles. And if you're going to do that, you position here. You open up with guns, and then if it becomes a problem, you just go boop, and you're dark.
This is also part of the argument against range mod in destroyers. There's very few that you want to run that. And the reason for that is you can outrange your spotting, so your bloom doesn't matter anymore. And it's good to keep an idea of if I'm playing Kidda or something at 11.8, and I hang at 11 kilometers, and I'm pulling distraction tactics to try and get a Hinden off of my destroyers, I start opening up at 11 and running away in that 20-degree position I was talking about. By the time he gets his guns over, pulls a shot or two that mostly miss, you'll be gone.
Right. I take it you want to go into the room soon?
I do. I've got a training room
Let's do
up. Go ahead and join it. It's up under Rigel Alorn.
Can I
Pop on
make the
in.
closing?
Yes, you can.
Can I make the closing statement? Okay. For those that are interested in DD play, it's very rewarding. It's very high risk, high reward class, and it's very team dependent. You have to have a team set mindset. But overall, destroyer players are like the chess masters of the game. They're the guys that have to do the most thinking. It's the most thought provoking class in the game. So if you're new to it, you might want to start with cruisers, but when you appreciate the finance of the game, the finesse, destroyers are the way to go. Okay, just to let you know, it's very mind-boggling the things that you can do with it.
I agree. They represent the most damage potential and tanking potential on the field at any given time. A destroyer that's up towards the end of the game gives you a ton of advantage for your team. And there's just no other ship that can match that, except perhaps a light cruiser. But I mean, even then, light cruiser can get just dev struck, and a destroyer is much less likely to. So you've got a lot of good options. Okay, so let's get in the training room.